And as we continue, let's welcome our next guest that Judine has brought forth. He is Orlando Sanchez from Cuba, Havana, Cuba. He has been a politician here in Houston, Texas, doing tremendous work. His organization today is called TLC. That's right, Texas Latino Conservatives. Orlando, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you having me.
And my fellow Cubano.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Judine, that you mentioned that. I did not know you have a Cuban heritage.
Yes.
Certainly Orlando is going to tell us about that too, but that's amazing.
Yeah. So my parents came, or my grandparents came in the late 1800s, so I don't really have that experience of coming to America for the first time. And so that's the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what was that experience like? I know you were a young child coming over, but do you have any vague memories of coming over?
Yeah, vague is the appropriate word. I do remember a traumatic situation, and that's when the Castro forces moved into Havana. We used to live near what was called La Plaza Cívica, which is the Civic Plaza. And that's actually where Pope John Paul was going to hold Mass until President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had their little escapade. So all the world press left Havana, but that's where I lived. And I remember going, my parents moved us down to the first floor because there was a lot of gunfire. And I remember...
in Cuba, you can remember that.
Yeah, and I remember the stairwell going down to our neighbor's first floor apartment, and that stairwell...
Trying to take cover.
Yeah.
Wow.
That stairwell was exactly as I remembered it, and that's pretty much what I recall.
But do you remember coming to America once they decided to make that move? Do you remember those? I know you went to Venezuela first for a short time, but do you remember leaving Cuba? Do you have any memories of that?
Not really.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I never got to experience that part because been, I think, 3 generations here. So.
Right.
So, and then you were the first Latino to be elected citywide here. So you want to give us a little...
Well, I wasn't the first Latino, but I was the first Hispanic immigrant, naturalized citizen to be elected citywide. We had several. Leonel Castillo was the city controller many years ago, and then Gracie Sines actually was a city councilwoman before I was, and then I became the first immigrant Latino elected citywide.
Not born in the U.S.
Yeah, and then actually also became the first Hispanic immigrant elected countywide. So there's some interesting historic perspective.
Yeah.
And
well, I love
I tell
Texas
people all the
history.
time, only in America.
Yeah.
Only in America.
Yeah. And we have everybody coming here still, so we're the best place on earth.
Yeah.
And then, I heard that, your father worked for a judge. Is that how you got into the industry?
Well, my father was a baseball broadcaster.
Yeah, I know that.
In Havana. And,
for the Colts 45.
And his voice was carried over Latin America because baseball, of course, in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and Venezuela and Cuba are very popular. He was on baseball business in New York. And in late 1961, Houston was notified that Major League Baseball was going to have an expansion team, and they were going to be called the Colt 45s. The ownership among the owners was former Harris County Judge Roy Hoffines and former Mayor Roy Hoffines, and he wanted to start broadcasting the ball games in Spanish. So he sought out 2 well-known voices in baseball, and that was my father and Rene Cardenas, a Nicaraguan, and they both started here in Houston in April of 1962.
Wow.
So that's how we ended
story.
up here. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. So, and then now Colts 45 is known as Houston Astros.
Houston
now.
Astros, right.
So that's some more Texas history.
Yeah.
When you ran for mayor, tell us about that experience.
Well, it was a wonderful experience. I was not successful. I narrowly lost against the incumbent mayor, Lee Brown, at the time. As you remember, Lee Brown used to be the police chief of Houston, Atlanta, police commissioner in New York, former drug czar for the Clinton administration, and ran for mayor of Houston. And I served with Lee Brown 2 terms on the Houston City Council, but I was watching the decisions that he was making, particularly with respect to the pension systems of the city of Houston and how it was going to negatively affect the city of Houston finances in the foreseeable future. So I decided to challenge the mayor. I had no money in the campaign account, which is interesting. I think Mayor Brown had about $2.5 million. But it became one of the most historic races in Houston history. And the reason that happened is because we voted more people in the runoff than in the general election. That never happened. So the November election is where everybody turns out. And if you don't have a majority of the vote, and there were several candidates running, then the two top vote getters go into a runoff in December. Well, December is the holiday season. Everybody's out shopping. Guys in Texas are out hunting. And so the turnout for a runoff election is historically low and lower than the general election. Well, we actually voted more people in the runoff than in the general election.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then you, of course, got a lot of Hispanic votes as well.
We did, and that's a great question because historically, Hispanics back then only made up about 7% of the total vote in city elections. We doubled that to almost 14%. And what was interesting, however, was that I received well over 70% of the Hispanic vote. That was interesting because most of the media had portrayed me as a very, conservative kind of Republican, even though that city races are nonpartisan. But they did that to sort of drive down the enthusiasm and turnout. Well, it didn't work, and Hispanics turned out in large numbers, and I received almost three-quarters of that, well over three-quarters of that vote.
And didn't you do a survey about Latino voters and,
Yeah, so recently, when I served as county treasurer for Harris County for 3 terms, that's 12 years, I saw some trends that were not good for conservative leadership in Texas. As you know, we meaning Republicans, hold every statewide office from the governor on down. But the margins were getting thinner. In other words, the percentage of the Hispanic vote going to Republicans was getting smaller and smaller. We've lost every major county in Texas: Harris County, Dallas County, Bexar County, Travis County, El Paso County. We still win the suburbs, the exurbs, and rural Texas. But I didn't see the Republican Party doing the work necessary to encourage more Hispanics to participate and devote their values, which are naturally conservative. So I started a political action committee called Texas Latino Conservatives. The acronym is TLC.
Right.
And just a few months ago, we concluded a historic and major poll of Latino attitudes. We all know that Hispanics are voting more conservative, and particularly around the Rio Grande River, South Texas, and the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley. But we wanted to know exactly why and what's driving them and what are their values. And so we conducted a poll of 1,200 registered Hispanic voters in specific regions of Texas. And we had some really interesting results. For example, 61% of Hispanics are bothered by the Democratic Party.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they say why?
Well, they did say why.
Okay.
They interestingly, they said that, and it was an open-ended question, so they just told us that they see the Democratic Party as the party of los vagos, which translated means the party of the lazy. Hispanics,
my goodness.
The lazy.
The
Wow.
lazy. Hispanics don't like handouts. And it's really interesting.
They really don't. They're such hard workers. You know. They're
I tell people all the
incredibly hard
time.
workers and have a lot of family values and pride.
Yeah, we say to people, I hear Hispanics say, how many Latinos do you see begging at the corner? Well, we don't.
None.
The only time you see a Hispanic begging is begging for a job
For
at Home
work.
Depot or at Lowe's.
But they're asking for work.
Right.
They're not begging for a handout.
So they
exactly
value
right.
work, and as they become more economically and socially upwardly mobile, they begin to vote like their neighbors. And so we're seeing this explosion of Hispanics going into Texas suburbs and exurbs and voting conservative. Of course, along the Rio Grande, the communities down there, let's say Del Rio, Eagle Pass, Brownsville, they're getting hammered by this wave of illegal immigration. People don't understand that the taxpayers there, and taxpayers in Texas are generally property taxpayers. They fund everything from public education to EMS to law enforcement to the local jail, and to the extent they have a county community hospital, they fund that too. And these communities are getting hammered, and as more and more undocumented illegal aliens cross the border, it's the South Texas communities that are absorbing the brunt. And so that's why they're supporting more conservatives and more Republicans, because according to our poll, they see that Republicans do a better job of controlling the border.
Yeah, and I work with quite a few Hispanics in my industry, and they say the same thing. They don't want them to come over illegally. They want them to go through their normal channels, and so they're not for that. They're for controlling the borders.
Hispanics support border control fiercely. They're
do.
very patriotic. One other interesting question we asked: how do you identify yourself to your family and friends? And most respondents said as Americans. And then the next highest response was as Texans. Very few identify as, want to be Latino or want to be separate. No, Hispanics want to be part and parcel of this great country.
Yeah, they do. They have a lot of pride, Texas pride.
We're talking with Orlando Sanchez. He's the founder of Texas Latino Conservatives. Orlando, as far as your efforts going right now in your organization, how is it going? Are you being successful? And what's the outlook as you see as the election is approaching and all these things?
Well, we're excited about
Are we hopeful?
Yeah, we're very hopeful. And actually, we've had tremendous successes. So just to give the listeners an idea, we are two organizations. Texas Latino Conservatives is a general purpose state PAC where we actually endorse candidates and we make financial donations to candidates that we believe are going to be good conservative leaders in Texas. But we also have a 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization where we educate, we motivate, we do voter registration, and we also train young conservatives to run for public office. And we do that through an organization called Leadership Latino. Okay. And so, Bill, to answer your question, I trained a young lady by the name of Mayra Flores down in the Rio Grande Valley. And she was just elected in a special election as the first Mexican-born member of the United States Congress. She's a naturalized citizen, and her parents came here working as migrant farm workers, and she made history by becoming a Republican congresswoman in a Democrat district. It's House District 34 in South Texas. She's up for re-election. We also elected a young 18-year-old to the Kerrville City Council who's the son of Mexicans. We elected a Army veteran attorney licensed to practice law in New York and Texas by the name of Dan Corrales to the Midland City Council. Our former executive director, born in Juarez, Mexico, who is a graduate of Texas A&M, she just became the first Hispanic elected in Longview, Texas. So what we're doing is building
are being formed.
Yeah, we're building the farm team of future conservative Hispanic leaders in Texas. So very successful. We've grown. I never imagined this political action committee growing as much as it has. We were involved in 24 House races last election because we were trying to make sure that Texas continued to have conservative leadership. And if we lost the Texas House of Representatives, we would be in bad shape in Texas. So we were involved in 24 House races, very successful in those. And so that's what we do.
And as people are listening, they may want to help and go to the website. Let's tell people the website so they can find out more about the organization and also how they can help.
Well, the organization has a webpage. It's TexasLatinoConservatives.com, TexasLatinoConservatives.com. And the way to help is either volunteer for our many activities or make a financial donation so that we can continue to do the great work that we do across the state of Texas, encouraging, training, motivating, and electing young Hispanic conservatives in the state of Texas.
It's exciting that you're being that successful. We're going to take a short break. We're with Orlando Sanchez. He's coming right back. We're going to take a short break and come right back.